Peace be with you. Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. My name is Alan Kiesler, and today is Monday, the 31st of October, 2016. It's Halloween. So we are going to begin today a topic we've mentioned briefly before, but we'll go into great detail on. And before I begin, I will just wait a minute for a few more people to join the class and do a deep breathing, taking a deep breath or two, as I've instructed before. Just inhale deeply, slowly, and exhale slowly. That will make the mind peaceful and focused. You can close your eyes if you like. So, I have mentioned Ra as a sixth density social memory complex. And for those of you that have not been attending these classes and don't know what sixth density means, I will just very, very briefly explain that our world, our universe, has 7 or 8 densities, or different dimensions, you might say, levels of consciousness, ranging from the first level, which is just a sort of awareness which is possessed by minerals and the elementals like earth, water, fire, and air. And then the second level is that of plants and animals who grow and exhibit a turning towards the light, like a plant even turns its leaves towards the light, and growth and movement. The third density is the human density, or human dimension, where we are the self-reflection, or self-awareness, is the human level of consciousness. The fourth density, which our planet is entering into at this time, is the density of love and harmony and of telepathy, where everyone reads other people's minds easily. Fifth density is the density of wisdom, sixth of the integration of love and wisdom, and seventh is the final density before passing into a new octave of densities. So the first density of the next series of 8 levels of consciousness is the 8th level of this density that we're living in. So therefore the 7th density is the final one before entering into that new density. So very, very briefly, in the 4th density, because of telepathy, everyone can understand what everyone else is thinking and feeling. So therefore a group of people in that density together can form what's called a social memory complex. That is, they all start interacting with each other in perfect harmony and understanding. And so Ra is a 6th density group of beings who are in that sort of social memory complex, where they all can gain from each other's experience because they all are in perfect rapport with each other, all understanding each other's thoughts and feelings. So Ra is the author, we could say, of the Law of One books, which the last week or two, and in fact from the beginning of this course, I've often used material from the Law of One books. And I began in the early part of this course, I was talking about the secret space programs, which is a very, very important thing to understand in terms of what's really going on in the world today. And the fact that in the secret space programs, the participants, at least the higher level participants, are advised to read this Law of One series of books, because it contains we may say, the best information available, the most reliable information that we have obtained about extraterrestrial information, extraterrestrial sources, extraterrestrial sources of knowledge, knowledge of physics also, and knowledge of psychology, and knowledge of history of our solar system and of our galaxy. So this is a very important book, or these 4 volumes are very important, and they were written by, or dictated by, we could say, this entity called Ra, who is actually a group, a social memory complex, and in fact from the planet Venus. Their home planet, or its home planet, is Venus, which, as I had explained earlier in discussing the history of our solar system last week, Venus is much more advanced. That is, its evolution in first density began earlier than ours, and then that planet, they made a lot of progress very quickly because of the harmonious nature of the atmosphere and of the beings that were on that planet. So they graduated to 6th density already a long time ago, and so Ra is the name of that social memory complex from Venus that has authored these Law of One books. So before going into any more information about Ra, I want to explain that Ra dictated this book, or these 4 volumes, through a medium, or channel often called, that is an American woman, as I had mentioned once before, who would go into a trance state. That is, she would lose consciousness of external reality, and she would speak, her body would speak, not under her control, but under the control of Ra, and when the trance ended, she would not remember anything at all of what had happened. So the background of this happening is an American physicist, or engineer rather, by the name of Don Elkins, had become very interested in extraterrestrial phenomena back in the 1960s. He was an engineer. In fact, he was a professor, he was a teacher of engineering, and he began becoming interested, as many people in the United States did in the 1950s and 1960s. There was a lot of interest. So he was a scientist, so he wanted to try to understand scientifically what's really behind this phenomenon of UFOs and what is the reality about extraterrestrials. So just to very, very briefly recall this history, in 1962 he began a series of experiments, scientific experiments, to try to contact the pilots, or the beings who were on the UFOs. And he decided that the method that he would use was to engage in hypnotic sessions. That is, he had become familiar with how hypnosis can be used to recover memories that one cannot consciously remember, and it had been used quite a lot by the 1950s for, actually it was more in the 1960s, but at that time he was one of the early pioneers in this field. Those persons who had contacted UFOs, who had been contacted by UFOs and had had some experience but could not remember it, under hypnosis they could recall what had happened in much more detail if they had only very scanty memories, or if they had no memories at all of a period of time they had seen perhaps a UFO, and then the next thing they remembered, it was an hour later or something. So in order to recall what had happened, they might undergo hypnosis and then could recall everything, which is what happened to me also. My early experiences with UFOs, I had some very, very vague memory, or I was missing some time, or as I said, that there was a very special, magical, mystical place, and I couldn't understand why. And as I've told before several times, I even told my mother, "You're not my mother," and I couldn't understand why I had told her that, although I had some very vague idea something special had happened. And that place where that experience had happened, I knew was something special for some reason. But it wasn't until I was hypnotized that I could recall all the details of that encounter. So Don Elkins was aware of this phenomenon, and he actually began hypnotizing people, and he created a group, formed a group, in fact originally with some of his students who were volunteers, and then gradually other people joined. And one of the most important, as it turned out many years later, one of the most important people who joined him originally in 1962 was a woman named Carla Rueckert, who was a librarian, and after many years of she was working with this group that Don Elkins had headed up, she finally decided to join him. She quit her job as a librarian and joined him full-time in doing this research. And there were many interesting experiences they had as they were pursuing understanding all this psychic phenomena associated with UFOs and extraterrestrials. And Carla actually had a medical condition, kidney problem, and she had ovarian cysts, which her doctor had identified. And she and Don had traveled to Mexico as well as to the Philippines to see psychic surgeons, which is another phenomenon that you may be familiar with, where these people, who often are not educated at all, they are able to open up the body just either with their hands or with a very dull knife and perform some sort of surgery, pull out something from the body that may be, a medical condition, a disease of some kind, and they're healed. And then the cut that they made, or the opening that they made, just heals up immediately, perfectly. And many people have been cured in this way. So actually that is what happened to Carla also. She had those cysts removed by a psychic surgeon, and when she returned home to the United States, her doctor confirmed that those cysts were gone. So there were many experiences they had like this which prepared them for the work that they were going to start soon together. And let me just mention the third very important person was a younger man named Jim McCarty. Carla was also fairly young. Don Elkins was older. And Jim also was a very interesting person who was very fascinated by the subject of UFOs and had done a lot of research on his own. So in 1981 he joined them. And throughout these years, it was almost 20 years, in other words, that Don and Carla had joined him in the beginning, and this group of friends had been trying to contact extraterrestrial entities by going into sort of trance state or meditation and then just allowing words to come out. In fact, when Don and Carla and their group originally began, it's a very interesting story, they just thought somehow or the other, because they'd heard about this phenomenon, we can allow some message to come through us. So they would go into sort of meditative state and try to allow some sort of message come through. And in the beginning, they just meaningless sounds would come out. And they did this for some time, some months. And then finally one member joined, I guess a new member joined, who said, well, why don't you speak words instead of just making meaningless sounds and clicks and different. So, well, it was harder to do that, because when you're making words, then you might be afraid that what you speak will be nonsense. So, and in fact, in the beginning, there was a lot of nonsense spoken, but gradually people started saying things that made sense, and they started getting some messages from beings that were claiming they are actually speaking through them. So this took a long time. In fact, Carla was a member of this group, and she was the last one in the group of about 20, I think, to be able to actually articulate words and speak like this. But coming back to 1981, at the time shortly after Jim McCarty had joined this group, one day in January of 1981, Carla became the instrument for Ra to speak through her. Let me just mention one other important point, I think, that for many years Carla had been channeling in this way, or speaking in a trance-type state, but consciously. That is, she was always awake and aware of what she was saying as she was saying it, but she was aware that somebody else was speaking through her. But after one of her friends passed away, and before she had died, because she was young but had a serious illness, she knew she was going to die, so she asked Carla if she would try to give her husband a message after she had died to confirm to him that she was still living, because this was one of the understandings that their group had, that after death the consciousness does not end, the soul or the self continues to exist. But she wanted to sort of reassure her husband that she was all right, so Carla agreed that she would do that. And after her friend passed away, she felt sort of obliged to. She didn't want to do it, she said. She was kind of uncomfortable, but she had told her friend she would, and her husband had come to one of their sessions. And at that time, for the first time, Carla actually lost consciousness, and she went into trance. She became unaware of what was going on. And after some time, when she woke up, she found that she had spoken. They recorded the session. She had spoken in the voice of this friend of hers. That is, her body had been used by this friend who was on the other side, we can say, who had already left this lifetime, had left this body and had gone on somewhere else, but was able to speak through her body. And it was in her voice, in that friend's voice, not in Carla's own voice. So this was kind of surprising, but very, I guess, satisfying to Carla. And it was not long after that that, in the same sort of trance state, another entity besides this friend of hers began speaking. Let me say one thing, which you may or may not have heard. It is actually mentioned there on my website about myself, that when I was 19 years old, I was in college. The young daughter, she was 11 or 12, of one of my favorite professors, passed away. She died as a child. And not long after she had died, I was sitting in my room, in my college dormitory, sitting at my desk, writing in my notebook, when I felt that girl present. I didn't know her well, but I knew her, because actually this was really my favorite professor, so I'd been to his home, and I had met his family. So I had known the girl, but hardly anything about her. But I felt like she was present with me. And of course I was conscious, because I was writing, and I began writing. I did go into a sort of altered state of consciousness, a sort of trance state, and I went on writing 15, 20 pages in my notebook, just, rapidly writing. And it was, at least that's what it appeared to be, that she was speaking to her parents through me. She had said she wanted to send a message to her parents, so that's what I wrote. So I was a little embarrassed to do this, but after some time, maybe some days later, I got up the courage and I spoke to my professor about this, that this had happened to me, and he said, yes, please. He and his wife also were present. I went to their home and I showed them this portion of my notebook which I had written, and almost immediately they started crying, both of them. Tears came to their eyes, and I was afraid, I was worried, oh no, what has happened? And then they said, we accept that this is a message from our daughter, because it's written in her handwriting. So I'd never seen her handwriting, I didn't know how she wrote, but I had actually written in her handwriting, just like Carla Ruckert spoke in the voice of this deceased friend of hers. So these sorts of things do go on, and actually, as you know, if you've been following for the last week or two especially, I have taken a lot of material from the Law of One books, which I've been quite influenced by also in developing my own understandings. And the entity who spoke through Carla Rueckert for a couple of years almost, I think it was 1981 and 1982, for a number of sessions, over 100 some sessions, this entity called Ra gave messages. And these messages are very, very interesting and informative. And all the information about densities that I have spoken over the last week came from that Law of One series of books, which were spoken by this entity named Ra. And I'm just going to tell a little bit more about Ra, and you'll see how this is going to fit in to what I've been talking about, the history of our solar system and of our planet. So first of all, as I earlier mentioned, Ra was from Venus. Ra was a social memory complex, that is a group of a large number of beings who had integrated their awareness with each other, becoming telepathic. And for a long time, I think usually these social memory complexes can form in the fourth density, and they can then continue in the fifth and sixth densities and on. So this social memory complex from Venus was observing the solar system. They had the ability to travel not only by spaceship, but by astral travel or by mental travel, by becoming aware of what's going on somewhere else from a distance also. So Ra had been observing what is going on the Earth, and at one point this social memory complex decided that they would help the Earth in their development. That is, when they were in third density and were moving into fourth density, they were helped in a similar way by another social memory complex who had taught them about the use of pyramids. Pyramids are a very powerful source of channeling energy, and so they were used in healing, they were used in psychological development, and the Venusians, the social memory complex Ra from Venus, had benefited greatly from this help they had received from another social memory complex that was more advanced than them. So they thought, let us help the people on Earth who were also in third density and were having some difficulties. So they decided that we will help them in the same way that we had been helped. So just to backtrack a little bit, I think you all are familiar with, I've mentioned before, what is called the Prime Directive in the Star Trek series, Star Trek movies. And that Star Trek, by the way, is not just science fiction. It's largely based on actual secret space program information. So this Prime Directive is, in fact, a very fundamental principle that people throughout our galaxy and universe follow, which very simply is that you are not allowed to interfere with other cultures, especially primitive cultures. You should allow them to develop naturally, even though you could intervene and interfere, unless they allow it, or unless they invite you, actually. So there are certain principles that must be followed as to what it means for somebody to invite others to come and help them or intervene in their affairs for some reason. And usually when there's some distress, or there's a group of people who are intelligent and inquisitive, and they become somewhat aware of extraterrestrial beings, they may ask them, invite them, pray for them to please come and help us. So that actually happened over a number of times throughout the Earth's third density history. Ra was observing this and was somehow very indirectly, and often more by the way that they used with through Carla Rueckert, that is by speaking to them or through somebody, giving them a message. So Ra had done this previously. But about 11,000 years ago, Ra made the decision and got permission from higher authorities. I mentioned Saturn before, that there were advanced beings there, so actually there is a supervisory council of our solar system, you might say, that's resident on Saturn. So Ra got permission from that council to appear on Earth. So Ra appeared in a form that was visible. This is in Egypt about 11,000 years ago. And of course we know that Egypt is a very special place in human history because of the Great Pyramid and other pyramids there, which were huge technological accomplishments, engineering miracles, we'd say, that they've tried to explain. That is, the modern scientists and scholars have tried to explain how Egypt could have built these huge pyramids thousands of years ago. They usually don't say 11,000, but anyway, several thousand years ago, when they were supposedly quite backward in terms of technology, and so they have these fantastic ideas about how manual workers, could have hauled all these stones up ramps, etc. But it's inconceivable, really, that by the sort of technology that our modern history says they had available to them, that they could have actually built those pyramids. And similarly, in South America, there are huge stone structures. Not only there, but in South America, the most famous ones are other parts, like in Turkey, I've mentioned, in Syria before, in China, and other parts of the world, there are megalithic, huge stone structures. And one of the features of these structures is, especially the South American ones, they're huge stones, many tons, even hundreds of tons, one stone that big, and they are so expertly carved that they fit together perfectly. You can't even stick a coin or even a card in between the stones. So without any mortar, these stones were perfectly put together. So that means there must have been some very advanced technology involved in the construction of those buildings. So that's one of the proofs, by the way, of extraterrestrial intervention or involvement in human affairs, or at least that our ancient ancestors were very, very technologically advanced, far more than we are even. So one of the explanations that has been offered was that extraterrestrials were involved in these South American civilizations' development and taught them this technology, or themselves constructed these buildings. And similarly in Egypt, the pyramids were constructed by highly advanced technology, obviously, but that was also brought by extraterrestrials. So this entity, Ra, this social memory complex, whose home planet is Venus, they came to Earth and made themselves visible to the Egyptians at that time, and they actually constructed the pyramid also, and other pyramids as well as the Great Pyramid, but the Great Pyramid was the first one and the most important one, which was utilized and was to be utilized for healing especially, and for, we could say, psychological or psychic or spiritual development and advancement. So unfortunately, as Ra explains in the Law of One books, the experiment to try to help us on Earth didn't work very well, for the simple reason that the Egyptians at that time had a hierarchical society, and although Ra's purpose was very benevolent and trying to help us, it didn't work very well because, first of all, the Egyptians started worshiping them, or Ra as a god, and then they developed a priesthood to intervene or to interpret the actions of this divinity, and so the society utilized its own lack of development, we can say, or its form of development, in a way that Ra was not at all intending. So the teachings that they had given, which were meant for everybody, were monopolized by a small group of priests and rulers. So Ra became frustrated, disappointed, and left because of the failure of that early attempt. So it had some negative consequences. So that's one reason why Ra is come back at this time and is trying to help us, because they have a debt to be paid. That is, they caused problems which resulted in, as we know, in Egyptian society, it was a very stratified or hierarchical society, and there were a lot of problems. Eventually there were wars, there was a lot of suffering that resulted, although Ra was of course very well intentioned, but Ra explained that because they had been helped and it had worked in their society, because their society was, not so, well, I guess we can say hierarchical maybe is the best word, stratified type of society where there are the haves and the have-nots. Their society was not like that. So their help that they got from another social memory complex group was very helpful, and it worked for them very well. So they thought it would also help us, but they didn't understand the difference between the society on Earth and their own society, which led to that disaster, we can even say. So now they are back, and they are helping us again, this time a little more intelligently, much better aware of the situation on this planet than they were at that time. So let me just see what time it is. Okay, so our half hour for the class is up, and we'll see if there are any comments or questions about this. And tomorrow I'm going to go on to more detail about Ra and the result of the interactions that Ra had with people on our planet. So let's just see if there are any good comments or questions here. Oh, I see Rihan Alawala is watching and has just shared the video. Thank you, Rihan Bhai. So it doesn't look like we have any particular questions or comments today yet relating to this topic. So okay, we've just got, so Muhammad Shoaib Sahib has mentioned Chariot of Gods. Yes, The Chariots of the Gods was a work by Eric Van Daniken, and he did a lot of research which showed that ancient, what we call ancient, myths about chariots from the sky, gods, they were actually extraterrestrials, and Ra was one of those beings who came here and was visible to the people of this planet, and they were considered gods. They were just not ordinary human beings, they were advanced beings like us, but they were just human beings in one sense. They were from another planet, but they were beings like us. But because of their technological advancement, because they were able to fly in the sky, and they had they and other groups of people also had many technological devices that were incomprehensible to the Earth people. So the people on Earth at that time considered them as gods. And that is one of the sources of polytheism, where actually people thought these beings were gods, and then there were a number of them, so they started developing these ideas, which, as I've said before, and as is actually mentioned in the Law of One books, this idea continued for a long time until the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, made it very, very clear to everyone that there is only one God, only one original source of everything. So the early extraterrestrials, meaning that many thousands of years ago, who came to this planet, were often taken as gods. And in fact, as we will in the future be talking long before that also, even previous to this cycle of our third density, the 75,000 year period that's just ending now, even before that, extraterrestrials had come to this planet. So we're going to be talking a lot more about that in the future. But for now, I'm just responding to Muhammad Shoaib's comments here, which are very good. He's talking about the chariot of the gods, chariots of the gods, which he says is the same phenomenon, yes. And he's asking, did they change our physical shapes? I believe that Ra did not do that at that time, but other extraterrestrial groups have and are still engaging in genetic engineering, which does change the physical shape also of the beings whose genes are being altered. And in fact, as we know from secret space program sources, there are quite a number of extraterrestrial groups who are very, very interested in our planet and our species. And there are a number, I think the number may be 22 as I recall, 22 different genetic experiments being performed on, and for many thousands of years they've been going on, to genetically engineer to change the human species. And not so much to change our shape as to change our abilities, to give us more advanced abilities. And okay, we have another question from Joshua Warren. Alan, can we all contact these entities through meditation, and what types med is recommended? I don't recommend any types of medicines or drugs. Some people do. Or what types of med means meditation, is Rebecca. No, some people do recommend some types of medications or some types of drugs to enhance the meditative abilities. I don't go for that at all. But what type of meditation is recommended? I've spoken about this many times, that it is very simple. Take a deep breath, inhale slowly, exhale slowly. This immediately changes the psychological condition, or the brain frequency changes very quickly just by slow breathing, by deep breathing. And then, as I've again explained before, the type of meditation that I myself use is to chant the names of God. I personally prefer just to repeat Allah, 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 as just usually silently I do it, or I can do it out loud when you're exhaling. Of course, inhaling you can't speak out loud, but you can meditate on the name of God, or you can use other techniques. There are many techniques. Many Christian groups recite the Lord's Prayer as a group meditation. And you can also, in fact, Buddhists usually, as far as I know, in my contact with Buddhists who do meditation, they focus on the breathing itself. That's also very effective. I've done that myself a lot also. Just the idea is you have to calm the mind. The mind is always thinking this, that, so many thoughts are racing through the mind. So you can focus your attention on your breathing itself if you have any desire to do that sort of meditation rather than repeating some prayer or some names of God. You can meditate on the breathing. Just think about, focus your attention on the breath going in and the breath going out. So these are the types of meditation that I've myself have used and have found very effective. So we have some more questions. Muhammad Abu Bakr, do you have any words to say about evolution theory? I presume you mean Darwinian evolution. The Darwinian theory of evolution is wrong, because the idea in that is that matter is there pre-existing. Gradually the molecules form into some living cell, and then gradually those cells combine together. You can say a social memory complex, a group of cells get together in like a Volvox, it's called, that early multicellular being, which still of course exists today, and that those cells then begin communicating with each other and they form a singular being, and then they gradually evolve into more complex beings, and eventually consciousness develops, and eventually self-reflective human consciousness. So their idea, that idea, which is the basis of Darwinian theory, is that those forms of matter, they just by chance or by the evolutionary process of of chance formations, which then become evolutionarily adaptive, so they survive more than other things that aren't so adaptive. That's the way evolution happens, without any conscious guidance. In fact, without any consciousness existing at all until a later stage of development. So that is a wrong idea. Consciousness is there in the beginning, and consciousness guides the evolution. Consciousness is what is responsible for those forms forming in the beginning. It's not by chance. Actually, mathematically speaking, evolution is totally impossible. That has been demonstrated a long time ago by mathematicians. However, I can say that the evolution that I've been talking about, that the Law of One books talk about, is the evolution of the consciousness. So the consciousness is there in the beginning, and consciousness is present in elementals also. Even a stone or a lake or a mountain has consciousness. Very rudimentary, you can say. And it certainly doesn't grow and it doesn't move, usually. But they have consciousness, and it's well known that plants and animals, of course, have consciousness. So the evolution of consciousness through the mineral state to the plant and animal state to the human state, and then on to higher states that we are only now becoming aware of, that sort of evolution is what we are talking about here in this course. So it's different than the Darwinian type of evolution, but it is a gradual progress. And it goes through similar stages as Darwin talked about, but not unguided. You can say guided evolution. Mohammed Shoaib, if you do slow breath, you may fall. I broke my hand doing it. Well, sit down. I've always said sit down and do it. You can either sit on the floor or sit on a chair. Sit comfortably. And yes, you've just said that, so sit when you do. Yes, very good point. As by standing one may fall. Okay. Now Joshua Warren has another comment here. Alan, last, there is some friends of mine who say the earth is flat, not round. What is influencing this idea to resurface, and will you talk on this further? I have also seen this on the internet. There are some people who are promoting this idea that the earth is flat and not round. The arguments are not very good, in my opinion. Some of them are obviously wrong. For just one example, I don't know how they can say this, but they say that when you see a ship going, it doesn't go over the horizon, it just gets smaller and smaller and disappears. But that's not true. It does actually gradually sink under the horizon. So the earth clearly, for me it's clear anyway, is a globe. This may be some disinformation. Some people may be promoting this idea just to cause confusion. I don't know. And another reason why some people may be promoting it is because there are some scriptural ideas or religious ideas which talk about a flat earth. So people get attached to that idea for that reason, and then they try to explain it scientifically, not very successfully in my opinion. But as far as I understand, if there are some real scriptural teachings about a flat earth that's not talking about this flat earth that we see with our eyes, that we are walking on and that we can fly around, as many people have done. I've flown around the world also. So with a flat earth, that seems difficult to explain. And similarly, the movement of the sun, if the earth is flat, then how come it's night on one side of the world and day on the other side at the same time? So there are many arguments against this flat earth theory, but it may have a different meaning. That is, the flat earth, there may be some sort of reality which is flat, but it's not this earth that we're living on. It may be, in fact, this is one thing that I've considered quite seriously, because the world that we're living in may really be a hologram. It may be a sort of creation of some sort of technology, not human technology, obviously, some sort of advanced technology. Okay, so I just lost my connection for a minute again. We keep it weak. I'm sorry I'm getting interrupted here, but so I'm going to end the class. So I'm going to end the class now because of the reconnection, but let me just hope I can get this at least this last little bit in, that my idea is that perhaps there is a flat place where the technology exists which creates this world that we're living in. So maybe that's the source of those ideas about a flat Earth, but it's not this Earth that we're living on. Okay, I see there's another comment here by Gemma Art. We can simply say that when we stop the world around us disappear by doing the meditation, only then we connect to the other dimensions through the signals of waves around us. Well, there can be different ways to try to explain how we go around a flat Earth. As I said, I'm getting a message again, my connection is weak, so I'm going to end the class now. I think it's time to end it anyway. Just checking, yes it is. So we've been on for just over 45 minutes. So thank you all very, very much for attending this class, and I think you'll agree this is getting very interesting now as we're getting into more details of human history, getting into the time, not really yet, but getting into some things that we are familiar with from our own Western educational system of the pyramids in Egypt, although they have the date off. But so this history is going to become very, very interesting now as we explore the interactions of Ra, the sixth density social memory complex from Venus, with our planet. So we'll take that up again tomorrow. So look forward to seeing you again at 6:30 Pakistan time in the evening, 6:30 in the morning here in California time, which, as some persons from other countries have requested, I've found out it's 1:30 GMT, the Greenwich Mean Time, 1:30 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. May God protect us all. Oh, I see one more question. Can we go to other planet and help them if they are backwards? We could, yes, when we become more advanced. Right now we're sort of on the brink ourselves of being technologically advanced enough to go to other planets in the secret space program. But whether morally and spiritually we're at that stage we would really help or cause problems for other people, I don't think we're really on the stage where we can help them very much right now. We need help and we're getting it. So, but we do have that technology, as we explained in the beginning of this course. The secret space programs are traveling to other planets, but we've already discussed that in the earlier part of this course. So if you've missed those early courses, you can go back to them. They're available on my website, allintelligentlife.com. They're also on my Facebook page here as live recorded chats. So you can answer your question by going back to see how our secret space programs are, in fact, and have been for several decades, going to other planets. Okay, goodbye. God protect us.